The night opens like a low, blue lantern. Wind breathes over the dunes in long, unbroken strokes, raising a hush that feels older than the stars. Far off, the horizon drifts like a sleeping tide. Near at hand, a grain-glittered slope offers its quiet spine, and on it, boot prints sink and soften, as though the earth prefers the memory of passage to the sight of it. The desert keeps its own scripture, written in ripples and erasures. Things are remembered here by how gently they disappear. A pale moon lifts and steadies. Its light does not break the sand. It settles into it, as if each grain has a tiny pulse that responds to the sky. One's eyes adjust. What first seems featureless begins to show seams, soft angles under the surface, faint geometries, a curve too deliberate to belong to chance. The dune ahead bears a question in its slope, and the air bears a taste like cooled glass. Travelers once spoke of this quiet taste when they crossed the empty quarter. Bedouin guides, carrying stories like water, pointed their camels toward horizons that never came closer, and sometimes, when the wind went still, the sand beneath their feet sounded different. Less like powder, more like breath against a shell. Some named the place that caused it Iram, city of pillars. Some called it Ubar, the Atlantis of Arabia. Old verses whisper of a people raised in might and folded into silence. Satellite eyes, years ago, traced ancient caravan roads converging at a single vanishing point. In Oman's Rub al-Khali, lines of trade like star lanes fading into a blankness no map could hold. Excavations found the ghost of towers, and beneath them, glass. Sand fused into pale, translucent stone, as if memory itself had been fired in a hidden kiln. Fulgurite, the scientists said, the mark of lightning, perhaps the bruised kiss of a meteor. Others heard in that glass the echo of a vow. The moon climbs higher. You come to a shallow dip, an amphitheater of sand. Here, the wind has grown patient. Its work is precise. A low arch shows itself, barely the height of your chest, its keystone worn to a soft eye. A hand clears dust from a carving. A spiral, nested in another spiral, star-marked and oceanic at once. A map of motion rather than place. The stone is cool. The arch breathes a tide of night air up from below, damp, mineral, carrying the suggestion of ancient rooms. Take a breath. Bow your head. Enter. The passage bends like a crescent. No torches burn, yet the corridor seems to hold a diluted light, the kind that lingers in caves long after day has left. Fingers brush the wall. Smooth, almost slick, with tiny bubbles caught inside like seeds. This is not quarried stone. This is sand transfigured by heat and time. The corridor widens into a chamber. At its heart, a level floor glints faintly, as if a thin film of winter has settled here in the desert's core. Look closer. It is a mirror, or was. A sheet of black glass stretches from curve to curve, so still that the moonlight trembling through a crack above seems to rest upon it rather than reflect. The ceiling bears shallow reliefs. Eyes half carved in stone, lids lowered, as if the room itself is remembering how to sleep. In the glass beneath, your shape wavers, with you, the outline of a tower, a dome, a line of pillars that cannot be there, yet rises. The image steadies. A city awakens across the floor. Columns gleam like frost. Domes bloom like pearl. Streets run straight and then turn to crescents, bending around courtyards where pools have been placed to catch the sky. The architecture is precise without being cold, ceremonial without cruelty. Mirrors are everywhere, on door lintels, set into pavements, angled on rooftops to exchange slivers of moonlight as if they were sacred letters. Some believe this people hallowed reflection more than radiance, that they turned away from the burning god of day and studied instead the tender grammar of the night. Light was not to be seized. It was to be invited, cooled, and offered back. Priests tended crystal chambers where sunset was coaxed to linger, a breath of gold preserved until dawn. To stare at the sun was regarded as hunger. To listen to it through glass was prayer. Names rise and sink in the mind. Iram, Ubar, the city of glass. None feel complete. Every name seems like a veil, one layer of cloth upon another. In fragments found far from here, obsidian shards etched with star swirls and script older than any ledger. It is said the people sought to keep what mattered by sheltering it from the harshness of noon. Knowledge that lived in half-light would live longer, they believed, protected by reverence and shadow. The desert, when asked to keep a secret, knows how. The vision in the mirror shifts. A procession crosses a quiet avenue. Figures robed in sand-colored cloth, faces turned slightly downward, hands cupped as if carrying breath. They enter a long hall lined with muted mirrors, each surface black as night water. At the hall's far end waits an opening. Not a doorway, but a sliver of perfect darkness, framed by stone. A thin line of moonlight falls upon it like a thread. The figures bow. The darkness deepens, and for a moment it seems the stars themselves lean to listen. Then the procession moves on. No words, no chant. Only the soft friction of sandals and the steady heart of silence. It becomes clear. This is no temple to gods, but to light itself. A voice drifts faintly through the air, though no lips move. It says only one thing, again and again. Soft, rhythmic, like a lullaby. Remember gently. You feel something stir. A pulse that travels through the ground and into your chest. For an instant, it feels as though the moon itself is breathing through you, drawing you into its quiet communion. And then, just as quickly, it ends. A cloud passes across the sky. The light falters. The plaza dims. The figures fade into transparency, their outlines thinning into air. The obelisk remains for a moment longer, flickering like a candle on the verge of extinguishing. One final shimmer runs along its base, and then nothing. You are standing once again on the empty plain, the grass cool and damp beneath your hands. Above, the moon continues its patient watch. Nothing remains of the city except the faintest glimmer on your fingertips, as if you had touched frost that refuses to melt. Perhaps this was nothing more than a dream conjured by the night. But somewhere deep in the soil, the earth hums still, a sound so low it might be mistaken for silence. Some who have camped here claim that if you lie down and press your ear to the ground, you can hear the faint echo of voices speaking softly beneath, as though the city still sleeps just beyond reach. And maybe that is the truth of Aesir, the city that did not die but withdrew, choosing the moon as its shroud. A city that traded sunlight for secrecy, permanence for peace. A people who learned that some truths must live in reflection, not in fire. The plains will go on glowing each month, long after the last believer is gone. The earth will breathe its hidden light, and the moon will drift above like a guardian who never forgets. And those who walk there in silence will continue to see, for a heartbeat, what the day refuses to admit. That not all ruins lie beneath stone. Some rest beneath the skin of night itself. When the moon lowers at dawn, the shimmer fades. The light returns to the soil, the hum to stillness. The fields turn gray again, their mystery folded back into quiet earth. But somewhere, perhaps in dream, the city continues to breathe beneath the veil. Alive, patient, eternal. Such silence is not emptiness. It is an instrument. Within it, a different kind of knowledge forms, a knowledge that refuses the glare of declaration. The city's laws, if they were written, may have been written on things that vanish: water, breath, polished dust. The library, if it existed, might have kept no books, only mirrors arranged to remember alignments of light at certain hours, certain seasons, certain years. One mirror to hold the moon in winter, another to hold a star at its lowest breath, another to remember how dawn stains the pillars when the desert blooms. A calendar made not of numbers, but of reflections. Somewhere, the moon keeps watch over its sleeping reflection, and the reflection, in turn, keeps watch over us. At the edge of a jungle where light seldom reaches the ground, there stands a structure swallowed by green. Its towers, once white, now wear a crown of moss and silence. Trees coil their roots through the corridors, vines curtain the doorways, and orchids bloom in the hollows of forgotten walls. To the traveler who stumbles upon it, the temple seems almost shy, its facade turned not toward the rising sun as temples usually are, but away from it into shadow. The locals call it the House of Dusk, They say it was built by a civilization that worshipped neither dawn nor day, but the hour between, when light and darkness blend into a single breath. Legends tell of a priesthood devoted not to gods of fire or creation, but to those of memory, of endings, of quiet continuance. Their prayers were offered not at sunrise, but at twilight, when the forest glowed faintly with blue insects and the sky trembled between gold and indigo. The first explorers to record its existence wrote of its impossible symmetry, hallways aligned with no celestial axis known to their charts, staircases that led nowhere but echoed like song when ascended. At its heart, they found a stone chamber whose walls were blackened, not by fire, but by deliberate polishing. When lamplight touched those walls, it disappeared. The surface drank the glow whole. No inscription marked its threshold. No altars stood upon its floor. Only an immense doorless arch carved with the image of two hands cupping an orb of shadow. Beneath the carving, one line of text survived in a language no one could translate. Over the centuries, each scholar offered a different reading. The most poetic of them all was this: "We hid the truth in shadow so it would survive the light. Walk inside. The temperature drops instantly. The air carries the smell of wet stone and something sweet, perhaps incense long gone, perhaps the memory of flowers that bloomed centuries ago. The walls lean inward like closing wings, and faint patterns ripple across the black surface, not carved but shifting, like the movement of smoke behind glass. If you listen closely, there is sound, not words, but breathing, slow and collective, as though the stones themselves remember their builders. In the center of the chamber stands a pedestal of obsidian, perfectly smooth. Upon it rests a bowl carved from translucent jade. Inside the bowl lies dust the color of moonlight. Some say it is ash, others powdered quartz. Yet when you draw near, it shimmers faintly, not from reflection, but from within, as though light lives imprisoned inside each grain. What ceremony took place here, none can say. But the placement of the pedestal, at the intersection of corridors that lead nowhere, suggests ritual, a geometry of devotion. The people who built this place knew the mathematics of silence, that the holiest space is not the one that reveals, but the one that absorbs. Glass has a weakness. It breaks from both force and knowing. Perhaps the rulers began to suspect that even reverence can sharpen into a blade. A decree appears in the mirror's deep, like a whisper pressed into wax. The great silence. No more records. Names unspooled from stone. Histories cooled and then erased. The priests unmake their own inscriptions. Leave only spirals that mean both everything and nothing. What they worshipped they would not betray. What they learned they would not arm their enemies with. What they feared they would not feed. Erasure not as defeat, but as a shield. The jungle around the temple hums softly. Cicadas, unseen birds, the whisper of leaves brushing against the stone. As night falls, a pale radiance seeps into the chamber through cracks in the roof. It is not moonlight but something dimmer, more diffused, the color of breath. It gathers on the bowl's rim, slides down its sides, and vanishes into the dust. The bowl fills with light that is not light, a living glow that never escapes. The builders must have known how to summon this strange illumination. They called it the still fire. The priests of the House of Dusk, according to fragments found in nearby ruins, practiced a faith without prophecy. They believed time did not move forward, but around, a circle within which all things were already known and would be known again. To them, the sun was a reminder of forgetting. Too bright, too consuming. The night was remembrance, soft enough to hold memory without burning it away. They prayed not for knowledge, but for patience. Every evening, as the forest dimmed, the priests would enter the temple barefoot. Each carried a bowl like the one on the pedestal, filled with the faint glow of the still fire. They would walk in silence, each step a syllable, until they reached the heart of the chamber. There they would pour their light into the central bowl, letting it mingle into one. And when the last of it was given, they would sit in the darkness together, breathing in unison until dawn. To outsiders, it must have looked like worship of shadow. But the priests said differently, "We serve the truth that cannot bear the day. Archaeologists who came later found no idols, no gold, no relics of power. Only fragments of blackened pottery and bones interred upright, as if waiting. Yet the strangest discovery was beneath the floor, a labyrinth of small tunnels, spiraling downward into the earth. They were not graves nor passageways. Each was barely wide enough for a single person to crawl through. At the end of each tunnel lay a smooth wall inscribed with a single symbol, a closed eye. No one knows what these tunnels meant. Some believe they were paths of meditation, a journey into darkness meant to test one's courage. Others think they were built to trap sound, to keep prayers from escaping into the forest. A few whisper something stranger still, that the tunnels were built for the temple itself, not for men, that they allowed it to breathe. When the last explorers descended those tunnels, they reported hearing faint whispers. Not voices, but tones, resonances that shifted with every breath, as though the stone responded to presence. Instruments recorded nothing, yet those who entered said the sound followed them for days after, surfacing in their dreams as a low chant repeating one phrase again and again. To hide is not to lose. The years buried the temple in vines. The jungle grew thick enough to drown the entrances. Only in rare seasons, after storms strip away the upper canopy, does the temple's roof catch a flicker of starlight. Locals still avoid it. They say the air there is too still, that even insects keep silent. Yet sometimes at twilight, when the forest glows gold at its edges, travelers swear they see the faintest glimmer beneath the leaves. An echo of light turned inward, pulsing faintly like a heart still beating underground. And perhaps that is the temple's final secret. It was never built for worship or for death, but for memory's survival. Its architects understood what we have long forgotten: that truth can burn, and so it must sometimes be kept cool. That certain knowledge, if shown to the day, will crumble. But in the slow patience of shadow, it endures. There is peace in that idea of faith that does not need to shine. Then comes a night without edges. Wind gathers from every quarter, meeting above the city with a sound like a slow organ of sand. The dunes approach not as waves, but as a tide made of breath. Pillars dim, domes lower their heads. Mirrors take the sky one last time and turn it softly back. Towers disappear as if they had only ever been exhalations. When dawn stands on the horizon, she finds a level plain. Where a palace sang, there is only a curl of glass in the new light, like the rind of a fruit pared while dreaming. Somewhere, deep in the green silence, the house of dusk still stands, its corridors filled with air as still as sleep. The bowl of jade still rests on its pedestal. The dust within it still glows faintly when the light fades. And though the jungle has claimed its stones, the temple continues to turn its back to the sun, keeping its vow of gentleness. One day, perhaps, the vines will recede for a moment, and someone will step once more into its shadowed heart. They will find no gods waiting there, only quiet. And in that quiet, they will feel the strange warmth that lingers where faith has learned not to shout. When that moment comes, the temple will exhale once, as if relieved to be remembered. Then it will close again, returning its light to the dark that keeps it safe. And so the story ends where it began, with a structure hidden, breathing softly, facing no sun, guarding, even now, a truth that asked only for silence to survive. There are places where the ground shines faintly at night, as though remembering the fire that once kissed it. Smooth black glass runs through the soil like veins of frozen lightning, and when you touch it, it feels warm, even under a winter moon. The villagers who live near these fields of glass tell an old story. Once, long before any empire drew its borders, the sky cracked open and stars rained down like tears. The elders say the earth still dreams of that night. The first to write of it was a shepherd from the high steppes, who described seeing a flame that did not move, suspended above the horizon, before the ground trembled beneath him and the air turned to fire. Centuries later, scientists would call such events meteor showers or impact bursts. But the shepherd's descendants did not speak of stone. They spoke of beings. They said the stars that fell did not die. They entered the world. In ancient myths, this idea is not uncommon. The Sumerians told of Anunnaki, gods descending on pillars of light. In the highlands of Peru, stories endure of sky visitors who taught the people to shape stone so precisely it could defy earthquakes. Across deserts and tundras, different tongues repeat the same shape of story. Light becoming flesh, knowledge falling from above. And yet the truest wonder may not lie in what fell, but in how the earth received it. The vision subsides. The black mirror accepts the last angle of moon and then releases it. Sand begins its subtle return, spilling along the edges in a slow, continuous murmur, smoothing corners the way a healer smooths a brow. Up in the passage, a single grain clicks like a bead, and then another, and then even that sound folds itself into the chamber's breath. Somewhere in the vast Gobi Desert, there exists a region called the Valley of Mirrors, a barren sweep of black glass stretching for miles, glinting under the moon like the surface of a sleeping lake. Geologists claim it was formed by the impact of a meteorite tens of thousands of years ago, the heat fusing sand into sheets of natural obsidian. But the local nomads tell it differently. They say the sky cracked open and something living entered the soil. When the stars departed, they left part of themselves behind, so that the desert might remember their visit. If one walks there at night, they say, the air hums faintly, and every step on the glass rings like a bell. The sound is subtle, barely there, but once heard, it lingers in the bones. Some have called it the Earth's echo of the stars. Others, a warning. It is easy to dismiss such stories as superstition. But when archaeologists came to study the site in the mid-20th century, they found traces of microscopic magnetism running through the glass, aligned perfectly with constellations above. The readings defied explanation. Each fragment seemed to carry an echo of the sky itself, as if the boundary between heaven and earth had once been softer than we imagine. Deeper still, beneath the layers of fused sand, they discovered carved stones, older than any human settlement in the region. Smooth surfaces inscribed with spirals and shapes resembling both suns and eyes. The carvings seemed deliberate, geometric, but no tool marks could be found. When light touched the spirals, they glowed faintly blue. The scientists said the phenomenon was fluorescence, a mineral reaction to ultraviolet light. The locals said the stones were breathing, and perhaps both were right. For when one stands in that valley beneath a moonless sky, the air does seem to pulse. The desert wind moves softly, yet it carries a rhythm that feels alive, an unseen current weaving between stone and star. Above, constellations shimmer in their quiet patterns. Below, their reflections ripple across the black glass as if answering a call. Between them stands the watcher, small and temporary, suspended in the oldest conversation of all. Heaven speaking to earth, earth replying in silence. There are those who believe these sites, the glass valleys, the craters, the fields where the soil hums, are part of a single design. That they were not accidents, but arrivals. Points where the boundaries between matter and memory blurred. Where something greater touched the world and left its shape behind. In many traditions, such places became shrines. The fallen stones were polished and set into temples. The glass was broken into talismans worn against the heart. Ancient travelers carried pieces of it across continents, believing it could heal sickness or grant visions. In Egypt, obsidian from unknown deserts was placed upon the eyes of mummies, so the dead might see the underworld more clearly. In Japan, mirrors forged from celestial glass were said to reveal one's true soul. Even now, the tradition continues quietly. Small fragments sold as ornaments, carried as protection, unaware of the deep lineage they hold. But among the Bedouin, an older ritual remains. When a child is born beneath a meteor shower, a shard of desert glass is placed near their cradle. The elders whisper, "May the earth and sky both know your name." Outside, the desert is the desert again. Veiled, star-marked, full of distances that are closer than they look. Yet the body carries a new geometry, as if the ribs remember columns, as if the skin remembers glass. There is tenderness in the throat, the way tenderness comes after hearing a beloved voice in a dream. The mind turns to evidence and finds it. Ancient caravan roads converging on emptiness. Radar-lit traces under Omani sands. Fulgurites like fossil lightning. Tales of a city punished for pride. Scholars noting that the punishment reads less like anger than like a careful folding away. The heart turns to symbols and finds more. Eyes half-carved in stone. Spirals that double as star maps. The notion that water can be a book if the reader is patient and the night is clear. It is not worship. It is remembrance of the time when the two were one. Those who sleep in the open desert on such nights often describe a strange sensation. A vibration that rises through the ground, faint but certain, like a heartbeat too large to belong to the human world. Some wake with tears on their cheeks, though they do not know why. One traveler wrote in his journal that he dreamed of hands made of light reaching upward from beneath the soil, not to seize, but to give something back. They were trying, he wrote, to return what was never theirs. The notion is almost unbearable in its beauty, that perhaps the falling of stars was not a punishment or invasion, but an act of exchange. The heavens lending their light to the soil, so that earth might learn to shine from within. And maybe this explains why, in the oldest myths, wisdom is never born in the sky, it is always born in the dust. Prometheus steals fire from the gods, yes, but he gives it to clay. The Maya gods create man from maize, not starlight. Even the Hebrew scriptures speak of breath entering earth and calling it alive. The lesson is the same across all names. That divinity must fall to be understood. So when the next meteor streaks across the sky, we look up in wonder, but perhaps we should look down instead, toward the places where those fires once entered the ground. The stars have not abandoned the earth. They have simply learned to sleep within it. And sometimes, under certain moons, the veil thins just enough to remind us. In those moments, the black glass gleams brighter, and the desert hum deepens to a note that feels like recognition. If you kneel and place your ear against the ground, you might hear it too, the faint resonance of creation replaying itself over and over beneath the surface of the world. When dawn comes, the sound fades, and the valley returns to silence. Yet something lingers, a shimmer in the mind, a warmth in the chest, as though one has touched a truth too vast to name. Perhaps that is the real meaning of the fallen stars. Not gods, not omens, but reminders, that even the heavens must fall now and then, to remember where they began. The glass will remain, gleaming softly under centuries of wind. The sky will continue to shed its fragments, and the earth will continue to cradle them with infinite patience. And we, walking between them, will go on raising our faces to the night, half in awe, half in longing, wondering which of the stars above us already sleeps beneath our feet. Some believe the desert chose them, these mirror keepers, and not the other way around. A kingdom hidden in plain dusk, a vow not to flaunt, not to conquer, not to blind, but to receive and return. Other kingdoms wrote in gold. This one wrote in breath. If the story seems too gentle to survive, the dunes answer, gentleness survives by stepping aside. Stone resists and shatters. Sand yields and remains. In a forgotten corner of the ancient world, there once flowed a river that defied all others. It did not rush to the sea as its kind are meant to. Instead, it turned upon itself and began to climb. A silver vein moving against the pull of gravity, curling through valleys and hills as though the earth had reversed its breath. Old texts mention it only in fragments. A line in a Babylonian hymn, "The river that remembers where it began," an inscription on a broken stele found near the Euphrates. "We made the current bow." A Chinese traveler in the 2nd century BC wrote of standing on its banks and watching the water move like silk drawn upward by an unseen hand. Scholars called it impossible. The faithful called it sacred, and the people who lived beside it called it home. The river of return, they named it. The myth begins with a kingdom built along its shores, a place of gardens and terraces where the water once ran obediently to the sea. For generations it fed fields, turned mills, carried voices from city to sea and back again. But when the dynasty fractured, the river became a witness to betrayal. Brothers warred over its banks, priests divided its blessings, and the water, they said, grew bitter. One night, when the moon was new and the air held no wind, the current changed. The next morning, the people woke to find the river flowing the wrong way. Boats lay stranded. Fish floated like silver prayers turned upside down. The court's astronomers called it an omen. The high priests called it a sentence. Yet among the people another belief took root, that the river had grown weary of carrying lies. It was said that it sought to wash itself clean, to return to its mountain source and forget the sins of men. Even centuries later, travelers spoke of it. Roman geographers wrote of a stream that runs from the sea into the land. In medieval maps, a single blue line wound in both directions, labeled Flumen Revertens, the returning river. One scholar proposed that an earthquake had tilted the land. Another claimed volcanic gases created hidden siphons that pushed the flow uphill. But the villagers, when asked, only smiled and said, "The river knows what it remembers. If you walk its valley today, though few do, you can still trace its ghost. The bed lies dry, but the stones retain a strange polish, as if worn smooth not by centuries of erosion, but by one long, deliberate motion." The locals who tend the nearby olive groves tell that after heavy rains, water gathers briefly, not in puddles, but in narrow rivulets that crawl back toward the hills. They do not last, yet each year the pattern repeats. Scientists have measured the gradient, it should be impossible. But the water does not seem to mind. At night, under the stars, the valley becomes a corridor of sound. Even without water, the air carries a faint murmur, a rhythm that swells and fades, like a current flowing through memory rather than stone. Some say it is the wind threading the canyons. Others swear it is the river itself, still alive, still running backward beneath the earth where no one can see. Long ago, when the priests realized the reversal would not end, they built a shrine at the river's source, a pool ringed by pale marble steps. They believed that when the water reached that pool again, the world would be made whole. Each year, they sent offerings downstream, knowing that someday the river would bring them back. Fragments of those offerings have been found far inland. Urns carved with lunar symbols, coins fused with shells, and tablets etched with prayers that speak to no god, only to the water itself. One such inscription reads, "Carry not our names, but their silence." Another, "If you must flow, flow home. Walk a few steps, turn once. The footprints behind you soften, blur, and then are gone. The dune you cross takes a new curve, a new shadow. If you return tomorrow, you will not find this exact arch, this exact seam, this exact blue hush of moon. Yet the place will still be here, altered and the same, like a thought that refuses words but never leaves." There is a gentleness to this faith, one that sees repentance not as punishment, but as return. The priests did not curse the river for turning away. They built their lives around its new direction. They learned to follow its inward flow, tracing the course of reversal as a spiritual path. To them, the journey against current was the truest act of devotion, an attempt to move back toward the untouched source. When drought finally came, the river faded quietly, leaving behind only the scent of salt and the echo of its own motion. The people stayed for a time, tending what fields remained. Then one by one they drifted elsewhere. By the time history caught up to them, only ruins were left. A scatter of altars facing not east toward sunrise, but west into the setting light. Even in ruin, the place seems restless. Travelers who camp along the old bed say they wake at night to the sound of running water. If they rise, there is none. But their footprints in the morning are rimmed with dew, as though something unseen has passed them by. A few have reported more, a sense of being observed, not with malice but with waiting, as if the land itself expects them to listen. Perhaps that is what remains of the river of return. Not water, but longing. A longing for the world to turn back toward its beginnings, to unlearn its noise and find again the stillness of its first breath. The river's rebellion was not against nature, it was a remembrance of it. In every faith, there is a moment when creation sighs and wishes to begin again. The flood of Noah, the purifying rains of Shiva, the deluge of Gilgamesh, all tell of cleansing, not destruction. The river that ran backward may be another telling of the same wish. That time, weary of forward motion, might find a way to circle home. And maybe, in a way, it did. Beneath the earth, Unseen aquifers connect in impossible ways, looping through limestone and cavern, weaving threads of unseen current that rise and fall with the pull of unseen moons. Somewhere in that secret web, the river of return still flows, tracing its spiral toward the heart of the world. Stand on its valley under starlight, and you might feel it, the faint vibration beneath your feet, the breath of something ancient exhaling in its sleep. The wind pauses, the air trembles, and for a heartbeat, it feels as if the whole earth is moving not forward, but inward. The river does not ask to be believed. It only asks to be remembered. Its lesson is gentle and easily missed, that there is a holiness in reversal, a wisdom in turning back, that sometimes, to find truth, one must flow against the grain of the world. When dawn comes, the valley gleams with thin threads of mist, curling upward as if drawn toward the mountain peaks. The sound of running water lingers faintly, though none can say from where. Perhaps it is only the wind finding its way through stone. Perhaps it is the echo of a current still climbing toward its source. Either way, the land remembers. The silence carries a rhythm too patient for the ear but clear enough for the soul. And somewhere beneath that quiet surface, the river keeps its vow, flowing not toward ending, but toward beginning. There is a teaching buried in that, shaped like a shell. Truths that are kept in veils do not suffocate. They continue. They draw breath through centuries by asking less of the world's fire and more of its quiet. Perhaps this is why every search ends with a handful of glass and a handful of sand. Perhaps the kingdom is not lost but practicing its ritual still, listening for a listener who arrives slowly enough to hear. For not all waters seek the sea. Some, remembering where they began, choose instead to flow home. In a corner of the high desert where the wind never rests, a half-buried arch rises from the sand. It stands alone. No road leads to it. No settlement marks the horizon. Just this single curve of stone, carved from the same ochre rock that stretches for miles in every direction. To the untrained eye, it looks like a ruin. To those who've listened to the desert long enough, it is a question left standing. No wall ever framed it. No inscription claims its purpose. And yet the locals, few though they are, speak of it as though it were alive. They call it Bab el-Nafez, the Gate of Breath. They say it was built not as a passage into a city or a tomb, but as a door between remembering and forgetting. Approach it slowly, and you begin to understand the name. The wind changes near the arch. What was once a steady current becomes rhythmic, pulsing through the open space in gentle sighs. The sand drifts differently here, spiraling upward, settling downward, circling in slow motion like incense smoke. It feels less like weather and more like respiration, the desert itself inhaling and exhaling through stone. Scholars who have found the site note its impossible precision. The gate's proportions match no known culture's design, and yet its geometry suggests intent. Two pillars lean ever so slightly inward, not enough to meet, but enough to imply tension, an unfinished closing. The curve between them holds a thin line of shadow even at noon, when the sun stands directly above. When night falls, the arch catches starlight in such a way that each grain of sand beneath it seems to glow faintly, like a pool of quiet dust-lit water. Some believe it was a monument to the breath of creation, the moment the world first exhaled itself into being. Others call it a threshold for the dead, a place where spirits pause to leave behind their memories before crossing into silence. There are older stories still, half erased by time, of a wanderer who built it after returning from a journey that no map could trace. He had traveled to the edge of existence. The legend says, where matter thins into light and the living forget their names. When he returned, he built this gate not to remember what he had seen, but to forget it properly. It is said he carved upon the stone an inscription so delicate it could be read only when touched by moonlight. Whatever words he wrote have long since vanished, yet travelers who pass under the arch at dusk sometimes hear faint whispers, breaths that are not their own, reciting syllables the wind carries but never translates. Archaeologists found the gate in the early 20th century, half swallowed by dunes. They dated the stone but not its mystery. There was no settlement nearby, no artifact, no tool, Nothing to explain why a structure so deliberate stood so far from human life. One researcher, after spending weeks measuring and mapping, wrote a final note in his journal. The sand moves around it as if protecting something. Then he left and never returned. The sky shifts. A faint coolness passes, a promise of dawn far beyond the horizon. Stars drain their brightness into the east without hurry. The Earth's great chamber inhales and exhales. Somewhere below, a mirror lies with its face to the moon, learning again how to hold light without claiming it. Somewhere above, a caravan stands silent while the camels dream. Between them, this moment suspends like a drop of clear oil on a dark pool. Perhaps he was right, for when storms sweep across the desert, the gate of breath is never buried. The dunes rise, engulf caravans, erase tracks, and yet the arch remains. Its curve always visible, its shadow always unbroken. It is as if the wind itself refuses to let it go. At sunset, the light turns copper and the gate seems to flicker between visibility and transparency. One moment solid, the next a mirage. Travelers who stand before it describe the same sensation. A strange lightness, as though something inside them loosens. A memory, a grief, a name. One woman from a nearby tribe told of walking beneath it after her husband's death. She felt a sudden breeze that carried his scent, and when it passed, she no longer wept. "It didn't take him from me," she said. "It just taught my heart how to breathe again." And maybe that is the secret. Some doors are not meant to lead anywhere. They exist simply to remind the world how to move between states, to show that even forgetting can be holy. When night deepens, the arch gleams with a pale silver glow. The stars gather around it like silent witnesses. In certain months, when the Milky Way lies low, the curve of the gate mirrors the curve of the heavens above it, forming a perfect circle of dust and light. Locals call this the moment of returning. They believe that at this alignment, every exhaled breath in the world, of men, of beasts, of wind, passes through the gate and becomes part of the night sky. Stand beneath it then, and you might feel the faintest current brushing against your face. It smells of salt and stone, of time and distance. It is not air, it is memory made soft enough to move. For the desert holds more than sand. Beneath its shifting surface lie layers of worlds. Seabeds, forests, civilizations, and dreams. Each grain is a story worn down to silence, waiting for the right wind to give it voice. The gate of breath and dust, some say, is where those stories exhale back into the universe. One sigh at a time. When morning comes, the illusion fades. The gate stands quiet, a simple arch of weathered rock. Travelers pass by without noticing. Yet if you pause, if you let the heat settle around you and the hum of the world slow to its deeper rhythm, you might hear it again, the faint pulse of the desert's lungs, breathing through the centuries. Perhaps the gate was never built for gods or ghosts. Perhaps it was built for us, for those who carry too many memories, too many names, too much noise. It asks for nothing but a breath. One deep exhalation beneath its arch, and the weight eases. Not vanished, only transformed, returned to dust, where all things begin again. No revelación raíces. No trampit. Only a soft certainty that the absence here is not empty. An intact silence, deliberate as a blessing. A city of mirrors and breath folded into the desert's book not as a warning, but as a way. Guard what is sacred by gentling it. Let the day blaze beyond the veil. Let night be the archive and glass the scribe. The pillars you cannot see still hold. The dome you cannot touch still curves. At twilight, when the wind shifts, the gate hums softly. Sand rises like mist and circles it once before settling. The sky turns violet, then indigo, then black. And in that moment before the stars appear, everything, the wind, the stone, the breath in your lungs, feels as if it belongs to the same silence. No one guards the gate of breath and dust. It does not open and it does not close. It simply stands, an unfinished thought carved into the desert, reminding all who find it that nothing is ever truly lost. The world exhales, the sand moves, and the gate listens. Perhaps that is enough. Far in the northern mountains where the air grows thin and the clouds graze the peaks like herds of slow white beasts, there are valleys where compasses falter. The wind moves in circles there, echoing off cliffs carved with faces long forgotten. Travelers who have crossed those ridges tell of a silence unlike any other. Not emptiness, but the sound of something holding its breath. In that hush, it is said, lies the ghost of a kingdom that decided one night to disappear. There are no ruins to mark it. No stones, no gates, no inscriptions. Only the suggestion of roads that lead to nowhere and terraces swallowed by moss. But shepherds still speak of it in half-whispered songs. A realm of light and learning, whose towers shone even at midnight. A people who mastered the art of listening to the stars. A court whose archives could recall every heartbeat of their history. And then, without warning or war, they left. One morning, traders arrived to find the markets empty, the hearths cold, the fields unharvested. Animals wandered untethered, doors hung open, and smoke from the last fires drifted upward like signals from another world. There were no bodies, no struggle, just absence, vast and deliberate. The chroniclers of nearby kingdoms called it divine punishment, a judgment for pride. But there are older, quieter theories, written in the margins of forgotten manuscripts, that the people of this vanished land discovered something, an unbearable truth, a beauty too great for the living, a secret the world was not yet ready to bear. Whatever it was, they chose silence over revelation. Some believe they retreated beneath the mountains. Caves in that region run deep, descending into chambers vast enough to hold cities. Explorers who ventured into them returned disoriented, unable to retrace their path. A few claimed to have heard voices far below, soft and harmonious, like chanting carried on water. Others spoke of faint lights moving through the darkness, not torches, but orbs that glowed from within. A mining survey conducted in the early 1900s noted a strange phenomenon in those caverns. The air vibrated at a constant low frequency, imperceptible to most ears but felt in the chest like a heartbeat. Instruments failed to record it. The scientists called it acoustic resonance. The locals called it the breath of the sleeping kingdom. According to mountain lore, the last king of that realm was not a man but a woman, Queen Lasara, the keeper of the veil. She ruled with gentleness, believing that power was not in command but in understanding. Under her reign, scholars devoted their lives to the study of sound, how it could shape matter, heal, destroy, or reveal. They built vast halls that hummed with music no instrument could produce, where walls and air became one body. They learned to use vibration as scripture, reading the world by its frequencies. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in the manner of ruins, measured, catalogued, caged in light. Perhaps it was meant to be met, briefly, between waking and sleep, when the mind sets down its instruments and the heart begins to read by starlight. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some gates in the desert open only when we walk slowly enough to belong to the wind. Then came the night of the great silence. The moon was full, the sky still. The entire kingdom gathered in the Hall of Echoes, a building said to be carved from living stone. There, the queen stood before her people and spoke a single note, a tone so pure it caused every lamp to flicker, every mirror to tremble. The resonance deepened until the stars themselves seemed to quiver. When dawn rose, there was no one left to greet it. The city was gone. Only the echo remained, vibrating through the valleys even now. Some claim the queen led her people into another realm through sound, a plane where matter becomes music and time dissolves into harmony. Others think she transformed them into the resonance itself, their consciousness dispersed into the very vibration that hums beneath the mountains. Whatever the truth, the air here still carries their trace. If you stand at the mouth of a certain canyon at dusk, you can hear a tone so faint it might be imagination. It begins low, almost below hearing, then rises until it melts into the wind. Those who listen long enough say it feels like being remembered by something vast and benevolent. Archaeologists found small artifacts in nearby caves, bowls carved from crystal, flutes of silver that produce no sound when blown, and a single tablet etched with words too worn to read. When held under moonlight, the marks seemed to ripple slightly, as if resisting translation. A scholar once described the sensation of reading them. It was not language, she wrote, but listening. Perhaps the people of the vanished kingdom sought not escape but preservation. Perhaps they saw the approach of an age that would no longer understand their quiet ways, and so they withdrew into the only place silence could protect them, between worlds, between breaths. At night, when snow falls in those mountains, the flakes drift strangely sideways, caught in invisible eddies of air. They form patterns that seem almost deliberate, circles, spirals, the shapes of sound made visible. The locals say that on such nights, if you close your eyes, you can feel the presence of the lost kingdom all around you, like a warm current beneath the cold. The kingdom did not perish. It folded itself away, like music closing inside an instrument, waiting for the next hand to awaken it. When dawn touches the peaks, the wind rises again, sweeping through the valleys with a voice that is not quite wind. It moves through grass and stone, through snow and memory, humming the note that began it all. And if you happen to be there, alone in that thin air listening, you might sense it, the faint tremor that seems to say, "We are not gone." Leave the chamber as you entered, the curve of the passage brushing your shoulder like a benediction. Step into the cool before dawn. The dune you climbed is already a different creature. The moon leans, then loosens her hold. The horizon becomes a thin, silver breath. Behind you, the arch lowers its gaze. Before you, the sands unfurl without urgency, each ripple a line of an ancient poem learning itself anew. Then, as light floods the mountains, the sound fades. The world continues as if nothing ever vanished. But for the rest of your life, in quiet rooms and sleepless hours, you will hear it again. The low hum of a kingdom that chose silence over glory, eternity over remembrance. They are still there, somewhere in the breath between worlds, waiting for the day when humanity learns again to listen rather than to speak. And until then, the mountains will keep their vow. The wind will hum their language. The snow will trace their symbols. And the earth itself will guard their secret, the story of a people who understood that to truly endure, one must sometimes disappear. Deep within the ruins of an unnamed palace, beneath floors that have not felt footsteps for 1,000 years, lies a chamber no larger than a chapel. The air there is cold and still even in the heat of summer. Its walls are plain stone, but at the center of the room stands an object that has unsettled all who have seen it. A single mirror, taller than a man and black as night. No frame adorns it. No ornament softens its edge. It is a slab of obsidian so polished that it swallows light, reflecting not the world but the absence of it. Scholars believe it was cut from a single vein of volcanic glass, quarried from the mountains beyond the desert. Yet the legends say it was not made, but found buried deep within the earth where the sun's gaze could not reach. They called it the eye that sees without light. It was said that whoever looked upon its surface would not see their reflection, but the truth of what they had tried to hide. Kings saw their betrayals, priests their doubts, lovers their unspoken lies. For generations, the mirror stood as both oracle and punishment. People came to it seeking absolution and left trembling, their faces pale, their voices hushed. But one morning, long after the palace had become a place of ceremony rather than rule, the reigning monarch, whose name is now lost, commanded the priests to summon the mirror into daylight. He wanted to see not himself but the gods. He believed that truth was divine, that no revelation could harm a pure heart. The priests warned him, for the mirror was sacred to shadow. But pride is a stronger flame than faith. At dawn, they carried it into the courtyard. The sun had just risen over the horizon, its first light spilling golden across the palace stones. When it touched the black surface, the reflection did not brighten. It darkened. The air grew heavy, the birds fell silent, and the light around the mirror bent as though drawn inward. Then, with a sound like glass inhaling, the surface rippled once and froze again. The king, who had stood before it, fell to his knees. His eyes were open, but his sight was gone. The mirror never shone again. A last glance over the shoulder. There is nothing there to see, only the finest drift of dust, a shimmer like the inside of a shell, and the feeling of being regarded by something kind and unhurried. Walk on. The desert's veil settles, and the night closes its lantern without extinguishing it. Somewhere underfoot, a kingdom continues its ceremony, keeping the sky in safekeeping, teaching glass to remember the moon. In the years that followed, famine and drought struck the kingdom. Crops withered, and the wells turned sour. The palace was abandoned, its mirrors covered, its halls sealed with wax. The people whispered that the sun had turned its face away, offended by what had been revealed. Some said the mirror had shown the king not the gods, but the sun itself, the true, merciless heart of light, and that no human eyes could bear to meet it. When archaeologists rediscovered the site centuries later, they found the chamber intact. The black mirror stood upright, unbroken. Dust covered the floor, but not its surface. It remained untouched, as though dust itself refused to settle upon it. Those who entered reported feeling disoriented, their reflection shifting even when they stood still. One man described seeing not his face, but his back. Another saw himself as a child. A third swore that the mirror did not reflect him at all, but someone standing just behind. Scientific instruments could not capture its image. Cameras showed only darkness, and when they tried to illuminate it with stronger light, the equipment failed. Some of the researchers dreamed that night of the sun flickering like a candle, its rays bending downward to form a tunnel of gold. It is easy to call it superstition, yet there is something undeniably alive about the mirror. At certain hours it hums faintly, a vibration too low to hear but strong enough to feel through the soles of one's shoes. When the wind moves through the ruins above, the sound rises slightly, as though the mirror is responding. Ancient inscriptions discovered nearby may offer a clue. Carved into the lintels of adjoining halls are fragments of a hymn. Light is truth, but truth burns. We see by the mercy of shadow. And below that, to know too much is to forget the face of the sun. Perhaps the mirror was never a curse at all, but a teacher, a device crafted not to reveal the divine, but to remind mankind of its limits, to show that even light, when seen too directly, becomes blindness. There are parallels elsewhere in history. The Aztecs, too, spoke of obsidian mirrors that could open paths to other worlds. In Greece, philosophers warned that the eyes are not made for truth, but for beauty, that the soul cannot survive unfiltered radiance. In Persia, mirrors were draped during mourning, so the dead would not be trapped in reflection. Across all these echoes, one idea remains constant. Mirrors are not windows, but thresholds. When sleep arrives, it does not fall. It glides, and the dunes glide with it. What you take with you is not a map, not a name, not a proof, but a way of breathing quiet, veiled, star-marked. Whether time buried them or truth protected them, the sand does not answer. It only continues, grain by patient grain, to guard the shape of a secret that has chosen endurance over applause. And in that choice, the night finds its gentlest law. And what lies beyond a threshold should not always be crossed. Today, the Black Mirror rests in a museum vault, though it is seldom shown. Curators complain that its surface absorbs humidity, that it distorts nearby glass, that visitors grow uneasy in its presence. On rare occasions when it is displayed, it draws the eye irresistibly. People lean close, expecting to see themselves, and find instead a feeling, a small, cold awareness, as if being observed by something within. When the light hits it, the darkness deepens. Some say this is the mirror's revenge for being forced into the sun all those centuries ago. Others believe it is still performing its ancient duty, protecting us, hiding from us the brilliance we are not yet ready to face. If you were to stand before it alone, without expectation, you might notice that your reflection is not entirely gone. It flickers faintly, like an image made of smoke. It breathes when you breathe, but its eyes do not match yours. They look slightly past you, toward something that isn't there, or perhaps something that is, waiting patiently behind your shoulder. The mirror does not reveal, it remembers, and so it stands, even now, the last unbroken witness to the age that forgot how to look gently. It reflects not our faces, but our insistence on being seen. At night, When the museum lights dim, guards say the mirror grows warmer, as if some faint glow rises from within. They say it smells faintly of rain on stone. A few refuse to pass by it after midnight. One older caretaker, when asked why, only murmured, "Because it shows the world as it truly is, upside down." The truth may be simpler. Perhaps it was never the mirror that lied, but the sun itself. For every light, however bright, needs darkness to define it. Every truth must hide a little of itself to remain bearable. A single lamp breathes over a table of old wood. The room around it holds the hush of stone and winter. A monk's cell, perhaps, or a forgotten corner of a library where dust has learned to fall like snow. On the table lies a sheet of pale animal skin stretched flat and pinned by smooth river pebbles. The surface shimmers with salt ghosts and thumb-polished edges, and upon it thread-thin lines wander like rivers that have lost their banks. At first the drawing looks familiar. Then the eye adjusts, and the familiar loosens its hold. Coasts drift where they should not be. A cape turns the wrong cheek to the sea. An island wears a name that should belong to a shore far away. The lamp flame leans and returns, and the map seems to take a slow breath. And somewhere, in that black reflection, the two still meet. Light and shadow, seeing and blindness, truth and the mercy of not knowing. The mirror waits in silence. The sun rises and falls, indifferent, and between them stands the world, caught forever in the shimmer of that impossible reflection. Shining, dark, and quietly afraid of its own light. In a forgotten monastery at the world's edge, where fog crawls along the cliffs like breath upon glass, there is a room that has no name. The monks who live there do not speak of it, though they all know it exists. Its door remains closed through the day, sealed by silence, and only when the moon has risen does a single figure enter carrying a small lantern, its flame dim as starlight behind cloud. That figure is the archivist. None recall when the role began or who held it first. The title passes from one to another without ceremony, chosen not by vote but by quiet recognition. Each archivist writes nothing of himself. Each disappears when his work is complete, leaving behind only the scent of wax and a single sheet of blank parchment laid upon the desk. The next morning, the room feels slightly changed, cooler, emptier, as if another breath has been added to the air. Inside, there are no shelves, no books, no scrolls. The walls are plain, carved from the same gray stone as the mountain itself. Yet the room hums softly, a sound like pages turning beneath the earth. To the untrained ear, it is nothing. To those who listen long enough, it becomes a language made of echoes. This, the brothers say, is the archive itself, not a collection of words but of absences. Every forgotten story, every erased truth, every silence left behind by the centuries. These are its contents. The archivist's duty is not to write, but to remember what was meant to be forgotten, and to hold it long enough for it to fall gently into rest. He sits at the center of the room, the lantern at his side. Before him lies a stack of parchment, a quill, and a bowl of ink blacker than pitch. But he writes little. Most nights he simply listens. The air thickens with whispers, the faint recollections of lost worlds. A kingdom that turned away from the sun, a library that sings beneath the sea, a river climbing backward through its own reflection. Each arrives as a breath upon his skin, a vibration through the stone, a murmur at the edge of sleep. He hears them all and nods, as if greeting old friends. When he does write, the words appear slowly, one by one, as if drawn not by his hand but by the ink itself. They are not histories nor prophecies, but something in between, records of forgetting. Tonight, he might write, "The gate still breathes, the dust remembers its name," or, "The stars beneath the earth are restless." When the page is filled, he holds it over the lantern's flame until the writing fades. The parchment darkens, then clears, leaving no mark. Another page joins the pile of blank sheets at his side. To an outsider, it would seem madness. To the archivist, it is prayer. Outside, the sea beats against the cliffs, steady and eternal. The wind carries the scent of salt and pine. Within, time unravels. Hours pass without notice. Sometimes the lantern burns low and nearly dies, but the archivist never moves to feed it. It seems to know its own rhythm, brightening when the whispers grow strong, dimming when the room falls still. Each glow reveals faint impressions on the walls, shapes like shadows cast by unseen books, outlines of hands resting on tables that no longer exist. The room is filled with ghosts of memory, and yet it feels neither haunted nor sad. Feels cared for. It is said that once every century, the archive opens its door to the world. The chosen archivist steps out, walks to the edge of the cliff, and watches the sunrise in complete silence. When the first light touches his face, he exhales, and in that single breath, everything he has kept is released. The wind scatters it into the world. The songs of vanished civilizations, the truths buried under empires, the names erased from stones. They drift like pollen through the air, finding their way into dreams, into stories told beside fires, into the unguarded thoughts that come before sleep. In this way, the forgotten is never truly lost. It becomes part of us without our knowing. Perhaps that is why, in every age, we rediscover the same wonders, the same myths of sunken cities, mirror kings, and silent temples. They are the echoes the archivist once released, finding new voices, new tellers. History, after all, is a wheel that turns not forward, but inward. In such rooms, the world has been made and unmade with a quill. Cloistered hands have coaxed oceans into circles and measured kingdoms by candlelight. The makers of these fragile worlds were not always sure of what they drew. They listened to sailors, to pilgrims, to winds unrolling in their minds. They shaped rumor into shoreline, wove legend into bays, and stitched stars to harbors with compass lines that crossed like faint spider silk. Sometimes they drew monsters to guard mistakes. Sometimes they drew nothing and let the blankness speak. Tonight, the archivist writes again. His quill dips into the ink, and a new sentence blooms across the page. Light does not die, it sleeps. He pauses, reading the line as though it were not his own. Then he smiles, faintly, and holds it to the flame. The ink lifts from the parchment in a curl of smoke, rising toward the ceiling where it joins the drifting whispers above. The words dissolve, their meaning preserved not in writing but in air. The lantern flickers once more, throwing a soft halo across the floor. For a heartbeat, shapes gather in that glow. Figures cloaked in sand and moonlight, temples submerged, gates breathing dust. All the places the listener has journeyed through this long night gather for a final moment, like constellations meeting before dawn. Then they fade. Only the archivist remains, his head bowed, his hands resting lightly on the empty page. Beyond the window, the horizon begins to pale. The sea hushes its roar, listening. The first light creeps through the clouds, touching the edges of the room. The archivist lifts his face toward it. His lips move, but no sound escapes, only a sigh that seems to travel farther than breath should. The lantern dies. The room returns to shadow. When the monks come at morning prayer, the door stands ajar. Inside, the desk is empty, the chair still warm. On the wall, where no writing has ever been, faint words shimmer and fade. Truth does not end, it waits. And far below, the sea carries the whisper away. Perhaps this is how the world keeps its secrets. Not buried, but sleeping. Not erased, but archived in silence. Waiting for the night, and the next listener who will dare to breathe them back to life. The night has reached its edge. The stories you have followed. The sand, the sea, the mirrors, the cities that sleep beneath the moon, begin to drift apart like embers at the end of a long fire. Each glows a little longer in the dark before it fades, and in their fading, something quiet remains. Stories gather around certain maps the way evening gathers around a courtyard. In a port by the old straits, a captain once brought a chart ashore, a patchwork of coastlines stitched from older skins, its ink still smelling of smoke. Some call it a gift from Ottoman hands, a work of careful listening assembled in the year when a new century was learning to walk. On it, a horn of land leans into waters it has no right to know, while further south a curve suggests a coast that light had not yet fully found. The chart carries a confession in its margin. Fragments gathered from sailors' tales, from a Genoese voyager who read the sea like a scripture, from pilots who could steer by a star and a smell. The lines feel humble and certain at once, like the face of someone who has traveled far and will not boast of it. Perhaps you have noticed it, the stillness that comes after the final word, the hush that lives between one breath and the next. That silence is not empty. It is the echo of everything you have heard tonight. The desert kingdoms, the temples turned away from the sun, the rivers that remember, the archivist's quiet hand. All of them continue there, beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered again. History, after all, never truly ends. It only changes its disguise. The ruins you imagine sleep beneath your own thoughts. The myths that seem so distant are only your own dreams wearing older faces. Each age buries its truths, and each listener uncovers them anew. So breathe once more. Let the stories settle. Let their dust fall softly upon the world. The kingdoms of shadow, the lost libraries, the vanished voices. They will keep watching from their hidden places, content to be half remembered. Outside, the stars are beginning to dim, their light thinning into the pale blue of dawn. The world is ready to wake again. Somewhere in that waking, the last echo of the archivist's whisper lingers. Truth does not die, it sleeps. And now, so should you, close your eyes. The earth breathes beneath you. The sky turns softly above. Between them, in the hush where past and present meet, the forgotten worlds wait, gentle, patient, eternal. The night is over, but the dream of history goes on. And then there is the whisper of another sheet. A map whose ink endured for centuries folded in silence, later unfurled to show a western shore drawn long before it should have been. Some celebrated it. Others held it up to the light and saw stitches that did not belong. Scholars argued in the soft thunder of pages and parlors, weighing fibers and saints' days, the subtle dance of black upon yellowed skin. Perhaps it was a forgery born of longing, a mirror held up to desire. Or perhaps, like so many things that arrive too soon, it came without the proof the day demanded. The wonder remains even where certainty does not. A map is a promise as much as a plan. The lamp wavers. The cell opens in the mind into a hall, a room of many tables where other atlases rest under linen. Here a Venetian circle holds the earth like a blessing, seas curled into the shape of a prayer, islands seated with little towers that sing of trade and tide. A Portuguese sheet gleams with compass flowers and lines that cross the ocean like faint music, each ray a memory of a wind. On a Catalan skin, a king sits in a desert holding a golden orb. Camels drift below stars. Ships run with striped sails toward coasts where spices are merely another way the earth speaks. In an English cathedral, an older map gathers pilgrimage into a wheel, Jerusalem at the quiet hub, Eden like dew beyond the rim. Each map is a vow, that the world can be held, if only for an hour, in two hands. Outside these rooms, coasts changed their minds each evening. Mariners watched shadows on water tell truths no ink could hold. There were pilots who learned the breathing of currents as if they were animals, who could hear a reef before they saw it, who knew the way the taste of the air changes near a river mouth, the way birds draw lines not to be found in any book. In other oceans, far beyond the range of these lamps, navigators traced star paths with memory alone, reading swells like Braille and calling islands up from the horizon as if speaking to them by name. Some carried their charts not on skin but in the body, a living atlas of pulse and chant, where the sea's long spirals became a library of return. The monk's quill lifts and settles. There is a pause in which the lamp seems to listen. On the waiting parchment, the hand draws a little cove where none existed before, then a narrow strait like a thread pulled gently through cloth. Why this curve? Why this gate? The ear, not the eye, provides the answer. The stories that seep into such rooms arrive with a salt crust at their edges. A sailor remembers how the sun fell behind him sooner than it should, how the swell changed grain without a cloud in sight, how night delivered a smell of leaf and loam where there was no land to see. Many small, half-true things make a coastline truer than a single proclamation. Many hesitant lines make a safer harbor than one bold stroke. There is a courage in leaving some places unnamed. The map understands. Along a long edge of sea, the hand writes, in a script that looks like water. Here begins the land the old men would not describe. Along another, beyond this bay, charts grow quiet. These are not failures but courtesies. A map that honors silence where it belongs holds more truth than a map that fills every space. Yet among the courtesies lie contradictions that wake the mind. How could a cape appear on a chart decades before a mast cut its wind? How could a river's mouth be drawn in the right place when those who knew it never came home? One answer presses gently forward. There are more travelers than the chroniclers counted. There were fishermen who never learned to write who read the world excellently and told their sons. There were whispers passed between strangers at wells. There were merchants who protected their lanes by wrapping them in fable. There were currents that carried seeds and driftwood and tales. There were storms that delivered a broken hull to a far shore with one survivor who remembered enough to change a line on a skin 3 winters later in a room like this one. Even the sky could deceive. A star seen low at the rim of the world draws coastlines toward it, coasts that melt away with dawn. A mist lifts and shows a barren cliff, and a hand decides it will be green on the map because everything about the wind said so. A lodestone lies near and pulls the needle a hair's width, and that width becomes a bay in another hand a season from now. The smallest tremor in a choice echoes down the decades like surf in a cup. The atlas opens farther, not in pages but in layers. Under the known coast drawn in brown, a ghost coast lies in gray, earlier guesses left visible on purpose, like palimpsest prayers. A margin note admits what the central strokes would rather not. 2 reckonings exist for this shore. Another note circles an island with a thin halo. If it is there, it is low. The humility is not a performance but a form of care. Those who will go where this line suggests deserve to know the line's softness. There is a sweetness in the names. Capes called for saints. Shoals named for birds. Bays that carry the sound of wind in their syllables. Even when they are wrong, they are beautiful, and beauty is one of the ways knowledge keeps itself alive. A name remembered can bring a sailor home who by rights should be lost. A name liked by the tongue persuades a council to provision a voyage. A name that hums in a cell at midnight persuades a hand to draw one more careful curve. The lamp trembles. The flame draws taller and then small again. In the narrow quiet between its breaths, the room's air fills with another room, another time. A workshop by a lagoon where voices from 100 harbors drift in through shutters. A chart room on a fort's high floor, shells clicking underfoot, wind pressing the canvas against the casement. A swaying cabin where a captain balances ink with the roll and draws a little star beside a reef that almost unmade him, then writes a soft warning. Enter only on a falling tide. These are all chapters of the same book, pages that cannot touch but rhyme with one another across years and languages. The atlas is not a single volume on a table. It is a cloud of careful breath that has traveled very far to gather here. There are maps kept out of sight, not hidden exactly, but allowed to grow quiet. Charts that held too much too soon are often asked to sleep. A ruler wants routes to remain private. A guild guards its lanes with a smile. A monk knows that to draw ashore is to invite a ship. So certain skins remain under linen in drawers that rarely open. The knowledge they hold seeps anyway, as knowledge does, through songs, through wagers, through the way a sailor's hand points when he is half drunk and remembering the slope of a swell beneath a gray day. The map breathes in exile and changes the world from the dark. Factual traces thread the drift. In a city where 2 continents nearly touch, a chart compiled from older skins gathers Atlantic coasts together with a confidence borrowed from voices that had tasted them. In a cathedral town across the water, a circular world plants paradise beyond the rim and still manages to steer pilgrims safely between rivers held in the mind. In a house of friars by a Venetian canal, a grand round map listens to merchants and returns their roads to them in ink, lacing the Indian waters with islands like beads. In far seas, navigators without parchment carry all this on the tongue and the skin, arriving as faithfully as any caravan that follows a painted line. The lamp accepts these threads the way a tide accepts moonlight, without hurry, without argument. The quill rests. The map's wet places gleam like eyes. Its dry places breathe like bread. A soft cloth comes. A hand lays it over the world, and the world sighs into the linen as if grateful for the covering. When the cloth lifts, the sea is still there, and the little bays, and the thin warnings, and the blank places where even the bravest ink refused to speak. The map has grown truer, not because it knows more, but because it knows how to keep its unknowing kind. Steps in the corridor. A key. The tilt of the lamp's flame as the door opens and closes. Then only the small noises of a building at night. The wood thinking, the stone quietly entering the next hour, the dust arranging itself again. In the corner, another roll of skin sleeps, waiting for a morning that will ask different questions. The atlas is never complete. It does not wish to be. Completion is a kind of blindness. A living chart leaves a little breath at every edge. Before the lamp is pinched, the eye returns once to a wide margin where the cartographer has left a note to no one and to everyone. The hand that wrote it did not intend drama. It meant gentleness. The ink has bled slightly into the fiber, so each letter wears a low halo. The coast will choose its own shape when we arrive. Until then, let this be enough. The flame closes like an eyelid. Darkness takes the room without malice. Out beyond the walls, the real sea breathes and turns, lifting and laying down its spirals in the night. Somewhere a pilot fixes a star in the corner of his eye and feels the long swell under his ribs like an old hymn. Somewhere, a reef waits with patience and a harbor with more patience still. Between them hangs the slight, luminous thread of a drawn line, not a command but an invitation. Perhaps the secret atlas is not the linen-wrapped bundle on the table at all. Perhaps it is the way 1,000 uncertain lines form a kindness that guides strangers home. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only followed slowly, with respect for the veils and the silences. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Some maps only become true when carried at the pace of breath. The room rests, the world rests, the listener drifts with it, over coasts that glow faintly in the mind, through star-marked lanes, past small islands that may be there, may not, and would be beautiful either way. When sleep arrives, it brings a coastline of its own, and there is room on it for every careful name, and for every blank. Evening leans softly against the mountains. The air thins until it tastes of stone and cloud, and a narrow path winds upward where wind and prayer share the same breath. Bells murmur somewhere above, faint and hollow, like voices spoken through centuries of fog. Along this path stands a monastery older than the road itself, a shape of wood and white plaster clinging to the cliff, its windows glowing like a handful of embers against the snow. Inside, light flickers upon the walls, and the scent of ink mingles with the cold sweetness of melting ice. There are no clocks here, only the rhythm of footsteps across flagstone, and the gentle hush of pages being turned. The monks move as though time were not a line but a circle, one that begins each morning with silence and ends the same way. Their robes whisper as they walk. Their faces are calm, carved by years of stillness. Somewhere within this quiet citadel lies a room where words are born to vanish. They call it the scriptorium of breath. Its doors are unmarked, its lamps always dim. Inside, tables stretch in 2 neat rows, each covered with parchment and shallow bowls of ink that shimmer faintly blue under candlelight. At first glance, the ink seems ordinary, but under the eyes of those who watch closely, something strange happens. The letters these monks write fade even as they form. Whole lines begin strong, dark as midnight, and by the time a page is complete, the first words are already dissolving, becoming pale, then translucent, until they disappear into the skin of the parchment as if swallowed by air. This is their vow to write what must be remembered, and then to let it go. Some say this practice began centuries ago, when a holy council ordered the destruction of all texts that challenged the empire's order of faith. Entire libraries burned. Words turned to smoke, and yet one brother, it is told, refused to let knowledge die. He mixed the ash of those ruined scrolls with mountain snow and oil from the lamps of the sanctuary, creating an ink that could not live in daylight. It shimmered, wrote cleanly, but would not survive the sunrise. The brethren who followed him preserved forbidden verses in their hearts alone. Each night, they wrote anew. Each dawn, their pages were blank. Memory replaced by meditation. Knowledge by devotion. They called it illumination without witness. And so, every evening, as the last bell fades across the frozen valley, these monks begin their quiet labor. Their hands are steady, guided not by ambition but by stillness. They copy texts that no longer exist in the world below. Lost gospels, old hymns, fragments of forgotten languages. But their purpose is not to preserve them. It is to honor the act of remembrance itself. They believe that truth, like breath, must move. It cannot be kept, only given. Watch closely as the quill glides. A verse begins, "The divine is not in light, but in the knowing of its shadow." The ink gleams briefly, alive with thought, then dims, softens, vanishes. The page returns to silence. The monk who wrote it does not mourn the loss. He exhales once, places his palm upon the blank parchment, and bows his head. To him, disappearance is not death, it is completion. The world outside these walls has always found their ritual unsettling. Kings and scholars visited across ages, demanding to see their manuscripts, to capture what they believed must be hidden. But there were never any archives to show, only stacks of bare parchment and monks who smiled without defiance. "We remember what matters," they would say, "and memory cannot be conquered." Some of these visitors left in frustration. Others stayed and joined the silence. Through centuries of snow and empire, the order survived not by power but by absence. Armies passed through the valleys and never found them. When plague came, they sealed their gates and wrote only prayers for the dying villages below. When the world forgot their name, they kept writing. What they recorded each night was never meant for discovery, only for awakening. Among the few fragments that remain from outsiders' accounts, one tells of a scholar who climbed to the monastery in the late 1600s. He arrived pale and fevered, carrying a bundle of parchment taken from a fallen abbey. "Save these," he begged, "before they burn." The abbot accepted them, but instead of storing them, he placed them in the hands of his brothers. One by one, they copied each page with disappearing ink, until all were transcribed. By dawn, the originals were ash. The scholar wept, believing he had failed. But the abbot only smiled and said, "Now they are where no flame can touch them." And so, the monastery became a living library without shelves. Knowledge stored not in walls or vaults, but in the breath of men who could remember for a lifetime and then release it back into silence. When a monk grew old, he would walk to the upper terrace, where the valley spread beneath him like a white sea. There, he would close his eyes and whisper the words he had written countless times before. Poems, parables, prophecies, and let the mountain wind carry them away. It was said that when he finally stopped speaking, even the snow held still to listen. What truths did they protect? No one knows. Some believe they hid fragments of early scriptures that spoke of light as feminine, or of gods who walked as dust among men. Others think they recorded celestial calculations, secret calendars of time long before the empire's reckoning. A few insist their true work was alchemical, that their ink was not mere pigment, but a spiritual substance meant to erase illusion, not language. Whatever the case, their mystery endures because they never sought to prove it. In every century, power fades, but the quiet faith of those who refuse to be seen, theirs remains. At times, visitors claim to have seen faint letters glowing on the monastery walls under certain nights, like constellations forming and dissolving at the edge of vision. The monks do not confirm this. They simply say, "The walls remember better than we do." And when asked why they continue to write in ink that vanishes, their answer is always the same: so that truth may travel freely. As the night deepens, the scriptorium hums with a stillness so complete it feels alive. The candles burn low, bending their light in slow, golden breaths. A page rustles, a quill scratches once more, and another line joins the silence. Beyond the window, the mountain exhales mist that drifts into the air like smoke from a hidden altar. Every flake of snow outside catches the candle's faint reflection, shimmering and vanishing, like the very words written here. When dawn approaches, the last monk lifts his pen, looks at the page, and smiles faintly at the pale emptiness left behind. He blows gently across it, as if cooling something precious, then folds the parchment and sets it aside with the rest. By sunrise, the ink is gone. The words exist only in the spaces they once occupied, like echoes that refuse to fade completely. He walks to the open window, where the light of morning touches his face, and whispers a final prayer not to preserve, but to forget. Around him, the bells begin their first low chant of the day, deep and resonant, rolling down the mountainside. The monastery stirs, the world awakens, and the last trace of night, like the words on those vanished pages, slips gently into the air. Perhaps the lesson of their order was never about secrecy or defiance, but humility, that knowledge, like the soul, cannot be owned, only borrowed for a time. That the truest words are the ones that fade when they have served their purpose. And so the monastery remains, half in cloud, half in silence, continuing its ritual as it has for centuries. Every evening, new pages are filled, and by dawn, all are blank again. The cycle continues, delicate as breath, infinite as snow. Somewhere, perhaps tonight, another hand writes a truth that will soon dissolve, and another heart learns what it means to let go. Some truths do not survive the light. Some, like these words, were never meant to. There are moments when the sea grows so still it no longer seems made of water, but of memory, layered, shimmering, and infinitely deep. On nights like this, the horizon dissolves, and the ocean becomes a single breath stretching from the edge of the world to the edge of time. Somewhere beneath that breath, it is said, lies a city of words, the first library humankind ever built, and the only one never meant to be read by the living. Off the coast of Sicily, where the Tyrrhenian waters darken into blue glass, fishermen once told of hearing faint echoes rising from the deep on windless nights. Not whale song, not current, not the grinding of rock, but something softer, almost human, like the murmur of 1,000 pages being turned below the waves. They called the place La Città Sommersa, the drowned city. No one believed them, not truly, until one summer afternoon in the early 1900s, when a storm tore across the coast and dragged the seabed closer to light. Afterward, divers sent to inspect the wreckage spoke of pillars carved with strange letters, their surfaces smooth as coral, their foundations resting upon terraces of white stone. At first, the discovery was dismissed, a mirage, a trick of refraction. But the divers returned with shards that glittered like quartz yet rang like bronze when struck. On their surfaces were grooves, repeating patterns too deliberate to be random. Scholars debated whether these were marks of writing or the work of the sea itself. Others wondered if they were not meant to be read at all, but heard. Years passed, storms shifted, and the ruins sank again into darkness. But the mystery did not fade, it deepened. As sonar mapping improved, strange symmetries reappeared on the instruments. Lines radiating like spokes, corridors branching like arteries. The sea seemed to hold its breath whenever the scanners hummed above it. One scientist, whose name is seldom repeated, said it felt less like searching for ruins and more like listening to something asleep. In time, stories bloomed like coral around the mystery. Some claimed the library belonged to an ancient seafaring people, guardians of a knowledge too vast to survive on land. Others spoke of exiled philosophers from Alexandria, who fled with their scrolls during the fires of the Serapeum and sank their knowledge beneath the waves, believing that water could preserve what flame destroyed. There were even those who whispered of something older still, a civilization that did not write with ink at all, but with vibration, with sound. According to this legend, the library beneath the sea was not built to store words, but to resonate them. Each hall, each pillar, each archway had been tuned to a specific frequency. When struck by waves or touched by current, the stone would sing softly, releasing a single tone, a note corresponding to an idea, a name, a memory. Together, these notes formed an unending hymn, the music of the world remembering itself. Imagine descending into that silence. The first meters are bright with light, sunlight filtering through ribbons of kelp, fish drifting like fragments of thought. But as you move deeper, colors fade. Green becomes gray, then blue, then something beyond color entirely. A gentle vastness that feels both empty and full. The sound of your breath grows louder, the sea around you heavier. Then, beneath you, a shape emerges. Columns rising like the ribs of a sleeping god, floors paved with mosaics of obsidian and pearl. There is no roof, only the ocean's endless ceiling. Each movement of the tide above creates a shifting play of light below, like words gliding across an invisible page. You drift closer, and the water grows colder, thicker, charged. When you place a hand upon the nearest pillar, the stone hums faintly, not randomly but rhythmically, as though the sea itself is reciting something, syllable by syllable. Divers who have felt this describe it differently. Some call it music, others call it language. One compared it to the sound of wind passing through the hollow of a shell, multiplied 1,000-fold. Another said it felt like a voice speaking directly into his bones, too low to hear, too ancient to name. None could record it. The vibrations vanished on every microphone, every hydrophone. They seemed to belong only to the moment of contact, as if the ocean demanded silence around its secrets. It is tempting to imagine what such a library once held. Scrolls of gold leaf sealed in glass, tablets carved from volcanic crystal, perhaps even the memories of those who built it, woven into resonance and stored in the currents themselves. Yet the oldest traditions suggest the library's truest archive was not physical at all. Its architects believed the sea remembered everything: the fall of rain, the sound of voices, the heartbeat of drowned cities. To them, the ocean was a vast mind, and the library was its heart. They built not to contain knowledge, but to teach water how to speak. When the empire that ruled them began to fall, it is said that the last of the librarians, scholars dressed in linen dyed with crushed shells, walked down into the waves at dusk, carrying with them conch-like instruments that shimmered in the fading light. As the tide swallowed them, they sang a final verse to seal the library's walls forever. The sea listened, then it closed above them, and the song has never been heard again. Even now, there are nights when fishermen swear the surface vibrates softly, as if echoing words that do not belong to wind or current. A few claim to have dreamed of luminous halls under moonlight, where statues stand half-buried in coral, holding open books made of salt. In those dreams, the books contain no writing, only sound, the faint murmur of waves against shore, the heartbeat of the deep. Somewhere in these stories lies a truth too delicate to touch. The library beneath the sea may never have existed in stone. Perhaps it exists only in the imagination, or in the language of the ocean itself. But in a way, that is enough. Every tide that rises and falls across the world is a kind of page. Every wave that breaks is a syllable. Every silence that follows, a punctuation older than ink. The sea remembers what the land forgets. And if one listens carefully, through the low roar of surf, through the hush between breaths, one might still hear the turning of its pages. A ship's bell tolls somewhere far away. The sound lingers for a moment before fading into the distance, carried by currents to places unseen. The sea accepts it, adds it to its collection, files it among the countless other voices it has gathered across time. The light above begins to fade. The last gleam of sun slides through the water and touches the pillars once more, setting them alight in ghostly gold. The hum grows softer, the song fainter. Soon, there will be only darkness, and the slow pulse of the sea reclaiming its quiet. Perhaps that is how the library endures, not as ruin, not as myth, but as rhythm. Every wave that folds and unfolds upon the shore is a line of its poetry. Every shell that hums against the ear carries a sentence too vast to translate. And every moment of stillness, every breath held in awe of the ocean's endless depth, is the reader's prayer whispered back to its author. Some truths, like sound beneath water, are felt more than heard. Some memories are so deep, they no longer need to be remembered at all. When night finally descends over the sea, the world above sleeps. But below, where silence blooms like coral, the library turns another invisible page, and the song continues, slow, sacred, and infinite. When night falls over the Anatolian plains, the air thickens with a kind of silver hush. The fields lie motionless, the wind gone to ground, and the horizon becomes a soft blur between earth and sky. In this stillness, if one walks far enough from the last light of any village, the land begins to shift. Subtle shapes appear beneath the moonlight, faint outlines where there should be none. The earth seems to breathe differently there. Stones glimmer faintly, as if remembering a brightness they once knew. Farmers who tend this soil whisper of a city that appears only when the moon is full and the night wind holds its breath. They say the outlines of walls rise from the ground like vapor, streets shimmer faintly across the plain, and doorways of pale light open onto nothing. A mirage, perhaps, but one that returns every season, faithful as the tide. The elders call it Aesir, the city of the moon. In the 19th century, a traveling archaeologist named Renaud de Vise wrote of this phenomenon in his journals. He described walking under a cold blue moon and finding himself among foundations that had not been there the night before. Rows of columns, polished stones inlaid with mother of pearl, even what seemed to be fragments of murals beneath a film of dust. When he returned at dawn, there was only grass and silence. His companions swore he had dreamed it. Yet he carried home a small shard of tile that gleamed faintly in the dark, as though touched by another light entirely. Long before Renaud, the locals had their own stories. They spoke of a kingdom that lived by night, a people who turned their faces from the sun and built their homes to follow the moon's slow dance across the heavens. Their city had no temples, only observatories, great open circles of marble where scholars mapped the rhythms of light and tide, of sleep and thought. They believed the moon was not a reflection of the sun but a separate heart, a guardian of dreams, memory, and the souls of the departed. When daylight spread, they hid indoors and waited for dusk to return. But the story darkens. For reasons no one agrees upon, the city was condemned. Some say they turned their backs on the gods of the sun and were punished. Others say they discovered something the world was not ready to hear, that the moon does not merely reflect, but watches. Whatever the truth, the legend ends the same way. One night, the city's lights burned brighter than ever before, and then all at once, they went out. By morning, nothing remained but an empty plain. It is tempting to call it myth. Yet the land itself seems reluctant to let go. Each full moon, the plains grow strange. Compasses fail, animals refuse to cross certain paths, and a faint glow rises from the soil, pale and pearly as frost. Pilgrims still come from nearby villages to watch, standing in silence as faint lines trace themselves across the ground. Avenues of light that lead nowhere. A handful claim they've seen faces in the glow, blurred but kind, looking upward as if still in prayer. Some scholars have sought explanations. The soil here holds high amounts of selenite, a mineral named for the moon itself. It catches light even in darkness, glowing softly when the air is still. Ground moisture, temperature, dust. All these things combine to create what the rational world calls luminescence. Yet even those who measure and record admit that the phenomenon moves like memory, not physics. The pattern of light changes each year, forming shapes that resemble towers, courtyards, even stairways spiraling upward before they fade again. No machine has yet captured them fully. They appear to exist only for those who wait quietly enough to see. Walk closer. The night feels alive here. The ground is cool, smooth beneath the hand. Beneath the layer of grass and dust lies something solid, cut stone. You trace a line that curves gently like a wall. Another line intersects it at a perfect right angle. The faint hum of the earth seems to rise through your fingertips, soft and pulsing. Around you, the air smells faintly of rain, though the sky is clear. You close your eyes, and for a moment, the silence tilts. The faint light beneath the soil becomes brighter. You can almost hear a rhythm, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of something enormous and sleeping. When you open your eyes, the plain is gone. You stand in the middle of a city carved of moonlight. It is neither ruin nor dream. The streets shimmer like dew, each surface luminous, but not with fire or electricity. The light feels alive, gentle, inhaling and exhaling through the walls themselves. The buildings are tall and delicate, formed of pale stone that seems to bend the moon's reflection around it. No torches burn. The illumination flows as if drawn from the sky, spilling softly through arches and colonnades. Figures move at the edges of sight, robed, quiet, walking without sound. Their faces are indistinct, blurred by a thin halo of light. Some carry scrolls. Others gaze upward toward the moon suspended perfectly above the city, large enough to fill half the sky. In its glow, the streets glisten like rivers. You follow one of the figures to a circular plaza at the city center. Here stands a single obelisk made of translucent stone, its surface carved with symbols shaped like crescents and spirals. Around its base, small vessels of silver rest, each filled with what looks like liquid glass. The figure places both hands upon the obelisk and bows. Then, as though in answer, the symbols flare faintly and vanish again.